so we're going to do the word list problem now. And so I've got the assignment document open. It says this question involves the process of taking a list of words called word list and producing a formatted string of a specific length. And the list will have at least 2 words. Okay, so they give you an example. They're saying here's the list of words. It's an array list. And they tell you on these, the end string's got to be 20 characters long. And so they want you to space out the words they gave you with the same number of spaces between each word, adding up to 20 spaces altogether. You can see it starts at 0, goes to 19. And there's going to be a basic gap width. That's like the minimum space between things. And then there'll be, if there's extra spaces, they want them done in the beginning. So right here, the basic gap width for the second example was 1. But then there's 2 leftover spaces. So this first one gets a space and that one gets a space. But this is still at the basic gap width. And then here's one where there's just 2 words. And the basic gap width is 11. And there's just one big block of things. So we're going to do 3 methods. The first one, total letters. It's going to give you the total number of letters in the words in the parameter list. So they told us it's this variable called wordList, and that it is an array list. So right here, public static int total letters, and they're sending in a list, and they would say array list on a test this year, but list is a parent of the array list class of strings. So over here, let's see, we received this array list, and what we're going to do is count up all the letters. So int count equals 0, make a count variable. Let's do an enhanced for loop. For string t in word list, then we say count plus equals t dot length. I think that ought to do it. And then we just return count. Don't forget to return, if they're asking you for something. You know by the header of the method that you're supposed to be returning an int. So I'm going to pause and make sure I'm happy with this. Hang on. Yeah, I checked my solution I did before, and I'm happy with it. If you did a regular for loop, that's totally fine. Let me just show you. You don't have to do it this way. You could say int I equals 0, I less than word list dot size, I plus plus, and then count plus equals, and so then we would do word list dot get I dot length. So hopefully you can see that gets us the same place, but also you can see why the first way I did it was just a little bit easier. You don't have to do all that. You're just saying, hey, I know word list is full of strings, so I'm going to throw them into a temp variable that's a string, and then I can just say t.length, so we just zip through without having to do this get call, or wordList.size. But, fair is fair. Okay, so then let's go look at the second question, because there's 3 of them on this one. Write the string formatter method basic gap width, which returns the basic gap width as defined earlier. So, you're going to use this total letters method that we just wrote. So they're saying, assume it's working, even if you're not confident about how you wrote it. And then they said you have to use that method if you want to get full credit. Okay, so let's do this one. Alrighty, so I'm ready. Oops, all the solutions. So we've got formatted len, and in those examples they gave us, that was 20, and then, but it could be any number. So what we want to do is find out how many spaces we need. And so what we're going to do is say int total spaces equals, what was the method we just wrote? Total letters word list. That's how many, this is how many letters we're going to have. The spaces is formatted len minus that number. Formatted len minus the number of letters. So, I mean, if it helps, I can give you an example. If we were saying, if there were 6 letters and we had 7 things, you know, we'd end up with cat space dog, and you'd call total letters on the list, and you'd get 6, and the formatted length would be 7, and so you'd get 7 minus 6 is 1 total space. You know, you'd have that number right there. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense to you. So this tells us how many spaces we're going to have. Now, the number of spaces needs to be divided by how many gaps we're going to have. And the number of gaps is 1 less than the number of words. So I can go back to, one sec, back to the instructions. If you go back up here, notice when they have green, eggs, and ham, that's 4 words, but there's going to be 3 gaps. Or if we have AP, comp, sci, rocks, that's 4 words, 3 gaps. Whereas when we have just 2 words, you have 1 gap. So we're going to, I'm just going to calculate gaps equals word list dot size minus 1. Now, granted, we could do this whole thing on a single line, but I'm just breaking it up to make it easier to read. So that's the number of gaps, because if there's 4 words, then we're going to have 3 gaps. And then we just get to do integer math. We can just say return total spaces divided by gaps. And that's going to return the basic gap width. So if there were 10 spaces, but we needed 3 gaps, you divide it and you would get the number 3. Because remember, integer arithmetic throws away the decimal, so you wouldn't get 3.3 repeating same back, you would just get 3. And anyway, think that through. That's the answer for that. I'll pause for a sec, and then I'm going to go resume again, and we'll do part C, which is the harder one of all these. But hang on. All right, here we go. We're going to do part C. This is where it gets real. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I'm going to do it the way they did it in their official solution. But then I'll show you what I did a couple of days ago, last week actually, when I was doing it for the first time. I did it a completely different way. Okay, so what we're going to do is we receive a length number for how long the whole return string is going to be, and then we receive a list of words, and then we're supposed to use all these other things to create that. So I'm going to make a variable that's empty, a string variable, formatted string equals empty quotes. Okay, so that's our final destination. And then let's peek at the problem. So the method's called format, and it's supposed to return a formatted string. And they're telling us about this method they made called leftover spacage. It's already been implemented. We don't get to see what it looks like, but they're saying, hey, there's this thing called leftover spaces that returns an integer. That's how many spaces are above and beyond the basic gap width. And then they're reminding us of all the different classes and things that you have. And they're saying, assume basic gap width works like it was supposed to, regardless of what you did in B. And they say you have to use basic gap width and leftover spaces if you want to receive full credit. So let's give it a try. So we made an empty string, and then at the very bottom here we could say return formatted string. So if you're struggling on something, you could do this and get like half a point. You always, you can see right here it says, hey, I want a string back. So you can make a string, make it empty, magic happens here, and then return that. That might get you, a point, a half a point, something. Every little bit helps. Now, they told us we need to use basic gap width. So int gap equals, and we're going to say basic gap width word list, comma, formatted length. So we just wrote that method, right? That's right here. Basic gap width. We send over an array list and how long the whole thing is supposed to be. Okay, but we're saving that in here. And then we want to know the leftover spaces. Int leftovers equals, and what do they call it? Leftover spaces. And again, we send over the word list and the length. So leftover spaces, word list, formatted length. Okay, so we got those things. And now let's do a for loop for int I equals 0, I less than word list dot size. I'm going to say -1. Pretty sure that's what I want. I'll explain why later. Okay, and in here, we're going to take the words one by one and put them onto formatted string. So I'm going to say formatted string plus equals word list dot get I. So we just added the first word off our list of words, and now we have to put the right number of spaces in, and we need to get, if gap is 2, we need to put 2 spaces there. So let's go ahead and do a little for loop for int s equals 0, s less than gap s plus plus. And we're going to say formatted string plus equals, so we're just adding a space. And we're going to repeat gap number of times. So if there need to be 3 spaces, this would go 3 times. And then the leftover spaces, we just want to add 1 more space to the gap until there are no, to each gap until there are no more leftover spaces. So we're going to say if leftovers, that's my variable name right here, is greater than 0, then formatted string plus equals, we're adding 1 more space. Oh, I thought I didn't have to put curly brackets around it, but I do. That's because we have to then take 1 away from leftovers. Leftovers minus. All right, and so what we're doing, we're getting, say, the first word out of the word list, and then we're putting the basic gap of spaces in, and then if there's any leftovers, we're going to add 1 space and then take 1 away from the leftovers variable. So if there were 2 leftover spaces, you'd get an extra space for the first 2 gaps, but then you wouldn't get any more. And then we have our return thing down here. Oh, and we have 1 more thing. You remember I did this -1 here. That's if there were 4 words. This is just going to do this process for 3 of them. And so when this for loop is over, right down here, we have to add the last word. So formatted string plus equals, and right here we're going to add word list dot get, and we need the last word from the word list. And so that's word list dot size -1. Remember, if there's 5 words in the array list, the last one is item 4. But that adds that last word in. So doing their specific example, we'd have AP, comp, sci, rocks. And so I put, I forget, but let's just assume, 3 spaces here, 3 spaces here, and then just 2 spaces here, because that was the basic gap width. But so that got us right to here, and then you have to add that last word, which was that one, which we got right there. I know this isn't exactly what they had, but I didn't want to go switching around the windows. So I'm going to pause and make sure I think I've covered it all. Hang on a sec. Yep, that was it. So this is kind of gnarly. Like I said earlier, I'm going to show you. I wrote it a totally different way before, but let's first look at their canonical official solution. So going back here, part A is like exactly what we did, or pretty close. I mean, my variable was called count, but it's the same. Part B, they did it all in a single line. They said return. So this is formatted length minus total letters, so that this top of this fraction is the number of spaces, and then it's divided by wordList.size minus 1. That's the number of gaps. So in our solution, we just did that over 3 lines. Doesn't make it better or worse. And then this is exactly what I just did, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I did want to show you, I did it a different way, not better, maybe worse, I don't know. But just in case you feel like you'd like to see it, and if you don't want to see it, you can tune out. That's the end of this program. I made a one-dimensional array called gaps, and I made it 1 less than the length of how many words there were. So I made an array where I'm going to put the right number of spaces into these different variables in a one-dimensional array called gaps. And then I got the basic gap width, like we did in the other one. And then I filled up this gaps thing with all the basic gaps. So I said, hey, if the thing's null, that means it's empty. Then I'm putting an empty string in there, and then I'm putting the basic number of spaces in. Right here, gaps I equals gaps I plus one space. And then I'm figuring out the leftovers. And then I'm using that number to add 1 space to the first, to all the gaps that are going to need the leftovers. So if there were going to be 5 gaps altogether and there were 3 leftover spaces, this for loop would go 3 times and just add an extra space to the first 3 gaps. Okay, so now where I'm at is I've got this gaps array that has the right number of spaces for each gap, and then I have all the words. So I had, hey, string, final string equals that. And then I'm doing a for loop where I'm adding word list, word I, and then I'm adding the gap that goes with word I right here. And then after that for loop, just like we did on our other solution, I added the very last word because there's no gap to follow that, so it can't be done inside the for loop. So anyway, it's a longer method, but a totally different way to do it, and also legit. There's an infinite number of solutions for each of these. So, hey, thanks for hanging in there, and I know this was a tricky one. Feel free to drop me an email if you're running into problems or you want to talk about your solution. All right. Hope you're having a good week. Take care.